Hey guys, tonight we slip into the creak and sway of a wooden deck beneath your feet. Salt stings your nose. The sky overhead is the colour of damp wool, and the sea is a restless animal growling under you. You are not a knight in shining armour, nor a merchant with chests of silver tonight. You're a woman bound for the Holy Land. You've left behind the damp stone hearth of home, the gossip of your neighbours, and the reassuring smell of your own bed linens. In your arms you clutch the sum total of your belongings, a rough-spun cloak, a small pouch of coins, and maybe, if you're lucky, a linen shift or two that's not already crawling with lice. You probably won't survive this. So before we go any further, if this quiet space makes you feel even a little less alone, you can like the video and subscribe, but only if it feels right to your heart. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Are you lying awake in a quiet room at 2 a.m? Or maybe starting your day in a rainy city? Eyes still heavy? Drop your time and place in the comments. Let's remind each other, we're not alone out here. Now, dim the lights, let your shoulders relax, and let's begin tonight's slow, strange journey, together, here on Timeless Sleep. The wind tonight is a bully, shoving at you from every direction. You've boarded in some damp northern port, Bari, Venice, Genoa, maybe even a windswept town in Normandy. Crusading armies don't move alone. Their shadows are women like you. Wives unwilling to let their husbands vanish into foreign dust, camp followers with nothing left in Europe worth clinging to, merchants' wives calculating the profit in bringing goods east. And you're not alone in your reasons. Some are here out of love, others out of desperation, and a few because the alternative, poverty, danger or shame, was worse than the unknown. The ship's deck is barely the width of a cottage. Wooden planks leak salt water between their seams, chickens flap in wicker cages, goats bleat in the hold, and somewhere below, barrels of grain and ale roll with every wave. The air smells of pitch, stale sweat, and the iron tang of fear. The captain shouts in a dialect you half understand, his voice ragged from years of yelling at wind and crew alike. You soon learn the unromantic truth of crossing the Mediterranean in the 12th century. It's not one big heroic voyage. It's a chain of stinking, cramped hops between ports, each one a test of patience and survival. A storm off Sicily can delay you for weeks. Pirates, real pirates, not the charming storybook kind, skulk along the coastlines. One unlucky merchant convoy can be set upon and stripped bare before it ever reaches Cyprus. At night there's no privacy. You huddle shoulder to shoulder under a shared canvas tarp with other women, children, and the occasional monk or unarmoured squire, too lowly to merit a proper berth. Rats are a fact of life. They chew through bags of grain and will happily chew through your hair if you sleep too soundly. The sea air makes your skin raw, your lips cracked, and your hair an unbrushable snarl. And yet there's a strange hum in the air, a tension of purpose. Some women pray constantly, fingers moving over wooden beads as the horizon slides by. Others whisper plans, setting up a market in Jerusalem, seeking a lost relative, finding a new husband in the land of crusaders and merchants. You overhear tales that sound half dream, half threat, of the sun so bright it bleaches your bones, of wells that run dry, of strange spices that burn your tongue, of silk so fine it can be pulled through a ring. Days blur into each other, meals are monotonous, hardtack biscuits that chip your teeth, dried fish so salty it burns your throat, thin beer or brackish water that tastes faintly of the barrel it came from. You ration the fresh fruit jealously, knowing scurvy is not just a sailor's problem. Sometimes, if the wind is kind and the crew merciful, you get a pot of pottage with onions and beans, a small comfort in this floating purgatory. One morning, you wake to shouting, not the usual sailor's bark, but the sound of genuine alarm. You crawl from under the tarp and blink against the sunlight. Ahead, the water is churning oddly, darker than it should be. The captain curses, a sandbank. The ship lurches as the keel scrapes, and for a moment you taste the metallic bite of fear. If the hull splits, you're all just cargo for the sea. Crewmen leap into action, throwing ballast overboard, untying ropes, pushing with long poles. Finally, with a groan and a shudder, the ship slides free. That night, the mood changes. There's less idle chatter. You catch women eyeing the distance as if they've been reminded just how thin the margin between life and death really is out here. Still, when the stars come out, they are sharper and more endless than anything you've seen on land, and for a moment you can almost believe the sky itself is watching over you. When you finally reach a port like Acre or Jaffa, the relief is overwhelming, but it's only the start. Disembarking is a chaos of shouting merchants, sweating dockhands, and soldiers who look you over as though trying to measure your worth. You step onto a pier, slick with fish guts, and wonder if this place will be your salvation or your ruin. Here, the languages shift like the tide. Greek, Arabic, Latin, French, all mingling in the market air. The sun is hotter, the smells sharper, coriander and cumin from spice stalls, roasting meat, the acrid tang of camel dung. And here you are, one more stranger in a city already full of them. Some women find the ports a kind of purgatory. Their husbands push on inland to Antioch, Edessa, or Jerusalem, leaving them to wait in rented rooms above taverns. Others never leave the coast, building a new life in the clamor of ships and markets. A few unlucky ones find themselves stranded, ships delayed for months, or husbands dead before the wives even arrive. There's a pragmatic rhythm to survival here. You find water first, clean if possible. You find shelter, preferably with a lock on the door. You guard your coin purse like a soldier guards his sword. And if you're wise, you find allies, other women who can translate, bargain, and keep watch. Somewhere in the throng, you notice women who have clearly made the crossing before. They move with the easy confidence of those who know which baker won't water down his bread dough, which innkeeper won't overcharge, which corners to avoid after sunset. Their cloaks are sun-bleached, their sandals worn, their eyes sharp. They are your reminder that survival here isn't just possible, it can be mastered. And yet, not all crossings are voluntary. Among the bustle, you spot women whose eyes are hollow, their clothes too fine or too strange for the docks, captives perhaps, ransomed back from enemy hands, or refugees forced onto any ship that would take them. Their presence is a reminder that the sea doesn't care why you crossed it. Over time, you'll realize the crossing was the easy part. The sea was just the first test, the trial that stripped you of soft illusions and polite comforts. You've traded one uncertain shore for another. Now the real work begins, to find your footing in a land where loyalty shifts like sand, where faith is as sharp a weapon as any sword, and where women like you will be remembered or forgotten by the choices you make next. And maybe, years from now, someone will tell a story about the women who boarded those ships. Some will paint them as noble wives following love into danger. Others will see them as opportunists chasing fortune, or as fools swept up in the fever of holy war. But you will know the truth. You crossed not because it was safe, but because staying behind was a different kind of death. The horizon you once feared has become the place you live now, somewhere between the salt-crusted rail of a ship and the stone streets of a city where you can smell the sea even on windless days. The journey is over, and in the same breath, it's only just begun. You've barely had time to unpack your few belongings, if you can even call it unpacking, since most of what you own still fits into a single rough-spun sack before the weight of home reaches you. Not the warm comfort of it, but the responsibility. The Crusade has swept countless men eastward, and behind them, in manors and villages across Europe, they have left a vacuum. A castle without its lord, a farm without its master, a port town without its guildhead, and someone has to keep it all from collapsing into chaos. That someone is you. You may have imagined yourself as a temporary caretaker, a placeholder until the banners return over the hill. But weeks pass, then months, and you realize the title you hold, Lady, Dame, Burgess, is not ceremonial. It is functional, dangerous, and sometimes exhausting. You're not merely the wife at home. You are the one keeping the walls upright, both the stone ones around the estate and the invisible ones holding your social world together. If you are a noble woman, your days are no longer filled solely with embroidery and supervising servants. You are managing accounts, hearing disputes from tenants, and inspecting fields. You're deciding how much grain can be spared for sale and how much must be stored for winter. The bailiff and reeve answer to you now, and though they may bow, you can feel them testing you, probing for weaknesses, waiting to see if they can nudge you into decisions that suit their own interests. One mainstream historical fact about this period is that many noble women effectively became de facto lords during their husband's absence. In England, for example, the 12th century saw charters and legal documents bearing the seals of women acting in their husband's stead. Some issued orders to garrisons, others signed trade agreements. It was not women's work as defined by medieval gender ideals, but necessity has always had a way of rearranging those ideals. Of course, not everyone is happy about it. The local clergy might preach about the unnaturalness of women wielding such authority. even as they come to you for funds to repair a leaky church roof. Neighbouring lords might see your husband's absence as an invitation to test your defences, sending probing raids into your borderlands or contesting your rights to a certain pasture. You must be firm but careful. Push too hard, and you could provoke open conflict. Too soft, and you invite predation. If you're of merchant class, the work is no easier. Your husband may have left you in charge of the counting house, and now you're negotiating with suppliers, overseeing apprentices, and dealing with creditors who suddenly remember old debts. In port cities, wives run entire shipping operations while their husbands trade or fight abroad. It's not glamorous. It's bargaining with stubborn captains, dealing with goods ruined by damp, and calculating profit margins on the fly. And then there are the women lower down the ladder, wives of craftsmen, labourers and peasants, who suddenly find themselves responsible for rent, taxes, and feeding children with no man's wage to rely on. These women often take on extra work, brewing ale, weaving, laundering for others, or hiring themselves out during harvest. In many villages, it's women who keep the bread ovens hot, the fields hoed, and the markets running while the men are away. The quirky fact here is that some noble ladies use this period not just to maintain, but to expand their influence. Chroniclers record instances of women arranging marriages for their children, fostering alliances, and even adopting new symbols into their family arms without waiting for the men's approval. One baroness in Champagne was noted for personally inspecting the fortifications of her keep helm on her head, keys at her belt, earning the grudging respect of her garrison. Your role as a woman left in charge isn't just about management, it's about perception. You have to appear unflappable. If a messenger rides in with news of a skirmish, you cannot let your hands shake as you break the seal. If the steward warns of grain running low, you must make decisions without betraying doubt. You become practiced at giving orders in a tone that is polite enough to be heard, but firm enough not to be ignored. And then there's the court, the endless stream of petitioners, peasants asking for tax relief after a bad harvest, a widow begging for protection from a greedy neighbour, a young man appealing a fine he insists was unfair. They all expect you to be just, but justice here is not abstract. It has a price, and you have to weigh it every time. Reduce a tax for one tenant, and you risk losing revenue you might need for repairs. Deny it, and you risk unrest. The pressure to defend your lands is constant. Even if you never pick up a sword yourself, you must keep your garrison fed and loyal. Men-at-arms can be as fickle as the weather. If they sense you cannot pay them, they may drift to another lord's service. You might ride out to the training fields, cloak snapping in the wind, to make your presence known. A few women did far more than that. Chroniclers tell of Matilda of Tuscany, who in the 11th century led troops personally, though she was an earlier figure. Her example lingered in the imagination of the age. At night, when the hall is quiet and the torches burn low, the solitude can be crushing. You keep the accounts by candlelight, the scratch of the quill loud in the stillness. Somewhere out there, your husband is alive, or he isn't. Letters take months, if they arrive at all. Rumours travel faster than truth, and you've learnt to listen to neither until a seal you recognise arrives in your hand. Winter brings its own trials. Roads clog with snow and mud, cutting you off from trade. Grain bins grow light. Illness spreads in the cramped hall among servants and soldiers alike. You find yourself bargaining with God in the quiet hours, promising more alms to the church, more bread to the poor, if only the season passes without famine. By spring, you've learnt that survival at home is as much a campaign as anything fought under the Levantine sun. And like any campaign, there are victories worth savouring. The harvest comes in full, a dispute between tenants is settled without bloodshed, the garrison drills with renewed vigour. These small triumphs are yours alone, though history may not remember them. Occasionally, you catch sight of your reflection in a polished basin or a still pond, and you're startled. Your face is the same, but something in the eyes has changed. You've learnt to read a man's expression before he speaks, to smell the approach of rain in the wind, to calculate the risk in a bargain before the other party knows you're considering it. You didn't plan to become a ruler in your own right, but here you are, and you've managed. Sometimes, you hear of other women in your position, through letters, through traders' gossip. A lady in Normandy who negotiated directly with the crown over her lands, a burgess's wife in Marseille who turned her husband's modest shipping concern into one of the busiest docks on the coast, a farmer's widow who defended her small plot against encroaching neighbours until her sons returned grown and ready to work. These stories are both comfort and reminder. You are not unique, but you are part of something larger. And yet, there's an undercurrent of fragility to it all. You know that when or if your husband returns, your authority will dissolve. Some men are grateful for wives who held the line in their absence. Others bristle at the thought of their women wielding such power. You wonder which kind of man will ride back into your hall. Until then, you keep going. Every morning you walk the perimeter of the walls, check the storerooms, hear petitions. You give the orders that must be given, sign your name with the flourish you've practiced until it looks confident, and in the quiet hours, you allow yourself to hope that the man you once knew will return to a home still standing, a land unbroken, and a wife who has become more than he left behind. You've learnt something the Crusades themselves will teach everyone in time. Wars are not won only on distant battlefields. They are fought, quietly and without fanfare, in the halls and fields of those left behind. And for now, that battle is yours to win. Marriage, in your world, is never just marriage. It's not a simple matter of two people deciding they rather like each other and then tossing flower petals on a church floor. No, here in the age of crusading kings and roving knights, marriage is as much about borders, dowries, and armed alliances as it is about hearth and home. And during the Crusades, the act of getting married, especially in the Holy Land, was often a political maneuver so precise and so risky it could topple kingdoms if mishandled. If you've followed your husband east, or if you've been sent as part of a retinue, you quickly realize that the Latin kingdoms, those small, fragile Christian-ruled states carved out of conquered territory, are unstable. Borders shift like wind-blown dunes. Alliances fracture under pressure. The rulers here, whether they sit in Jerusalem, Antioch, or Tripoli, are desperate to secure loyalty wherever they can find it. And one of the fastest ways to lock down loyalty is to marry someone into your family. It's not uncommon for newly arrived Crusaders, especially those of noble birth, to be paired off with local heiresses. Imagine arriving in Acre or Tyre after months at sea, barely finished coughing up salt water, and being told that by week's end, you'll be wed to a young woman whose family owns key farmland outside Jerusalem. Love is not the point here, land is. If the match comes with a fortress perched on a hill or a port town that can feed an army, all the better. One mainstream historical fact. This was exactly how some of the most powerful Crusader lords cemented their positions. Fulk of Anjou, for instance, married Melisenda, daughter of King Baldwin II of Jerusalem, in 1129, not for her beauty alone, but because she was heir to the throne. Their marriage wasn't just a personal union, it was a geopolitical chess move that decided the next ruler of the kingdom. Now, if you are one of these women born in Outremer, the Crusader states, you are in a peculiar position. You may have never seen the land your father came from in Europe, yet you are suddenly told that you will wed some pale-skinned stranger from the West, a man who probably still thinks of the Holy Land as an exotic place to visit, rather than the home it is for you. Your marriage is intended to bind him here, to make him loyal, to anchor his ambitions to this land by giving him a stake in it. The reverse also happens. European women are brought east specifically to marry powerful men who need connections back home. These women, sometimes younger daughters of noble families, carry with them not just their own dowries, but the promise of alliances with their kin across the sea. A well-placed marriage can mean reinforcements in the next war, or a lifeline if the tides of battle turn against you. But there's a quirky detail that many don't expect. Sometimes these unions aren't just about bridging two Christian factions. Occasionally, they cross cultural or even religious lines. There are rare but real records of marriages between European Crusaders and local Christian women of Eastern rites, Greek Orthodox, Armenian or Syriac. In some cases, it was politically smarter to marry into the local aristocracy than to insist on a purely Latin match. These alliances could be tense, given the doctrinal divides, but they also created unexpected hybrids of custom and household life. If you're a woman caught in the middle of these arrangements, the personal cost can be high. You may be uprooted from your family overnight, sent to live in a fortress where the wind never stops howling, and where your new family eyes you with suspicion. Your husband may be courteous, or he may treat you as nothing more than the human version of a deed to land. If you're lucky, you learn to wield what influence you can, managing the estate, smoothing relations with the locals, perhaps even playing a role in diplomatic talks. In the rarest and most whispered about cases, women manage to bend the politics of marriage to their own advantage. Take Isabella of Jerusalem. Married 4 times, each match arranged to suit the shifting needs of the kingdom. She was at once a pawn and a player, her personal life sacrificed to the survival of the realm. While chroniclers argued over whether she was a tragic figure or a shrewd survivor, one thing is clear: every one of her weddings was a turning point in the history of the kingdom. If you're a noble widow in Outremer, your value skyrockets the moment your husband dies, sometimes uncomfortably so. Suitors appear with suspicious speed, eager to claim your lands, titles, and connections. You might find yourself courted, not in the language of poetry, but in the language of troop numbers and tax revenues. A marriage proposal might arrive alongside a list of military assets, like someone selling a war horse rather than wooing a bride. The church keeps a watchful eye over all of this, of course. Canon law is strict about forbidden degrees of kinship, but in a small ruling class where everyone is related to everyone else after a generation or two, dispensations become almost routine. It's a strange paradox. The church wants to maintain moral order, but it also knows the survival of the Crusader states often depends on these very unions. For the less wealthy, marriage during the Crusades is no less strategic, even if the stakes are smaller. A blacksmith's daughter might be wed to a soldier to ensure her family's protection. A merchant's son might take a wife whose relatives can secure him a shop space in a good location. These are micropolitics, marriages that don't change kingdoms, but do change the balance of power in a single street or village. And here's a smaller, almost humorous tidbit. Some marriages between recent arrivals and locals fell apart spectacularly because of differences in food habits. Chroniclers snidely note complaints about Frankish men refusing to eat local dishes, or Eastern-born wives mocking their husbands for drinking wine like water. In a time when hospitality and the shared table are essential to alliances, such habits could quietly undermine the political goals of the match. Still, when these strategic unions work, they can be powerful. You might find yourself in a household that blends languages, cuisines, and traditions: an Armenian cook preparing dishes for a French lord, a Greek scribe keeping the household accounts, a Latin priest and an Orthodox deacon both invited to feast days. Children from such unions often become bridges between communities, fluent in multiple tongues and able to navigate more than one cultural world. But the shadow of danger always hangs over these arrangements. A husband killed in battle can undo years of careful alliance building in a single afternoon. A wife accused of disloyalty, whether true or not, can see her lands confiscated, her children disinherited. In a place where the sword often speaks louder than the law, the stability of a marriage can be as fragile as a truce between rival lords. And so you learn to see marriage here, not as the conclusion of a romantic story, but as the opening move of a long game. You might be the piece others try to move, but if you're clever, you can move yourself too, choosing when to yield, when to press forward, when to guard your position. By the time you've lived through a few seasons in Outremer, you understand the unwritten rules. Every wedding you hear of, whether in a castle hall or a dusty church courtyard, is also a treaty signing, a risk calculation, and sometimes a gamble against the odds of survival in this dangerous, beautiful, endlessly contested land. Widowhood here is not the slow, soft-draped mourning of a romantic poem. It is sudden, sharp, and very often dangerous. You may not even be certain when it begins, because in the Crusader world, news travels at the speed of hoofbeats, sailcloth, and rumour. Your husband may have fallen in battle weeks ago, or died of fever in a fortress you have never seen, long before the news makes its slow, stumbling way back to you. The messenger arrives on a sweating horse, his face set, his cloak dusty. He asks for you by name, and your stomach turns cold even before the letter, if there is a letter, is placed in your hands. Sometimes there's no parchment at all, just a verbal message from a commander or fellow soldier. The words are usually brief. No one wastes ink or breath on the details. In that moment, your world contracts and expands all at once. The loss itself is heavy enough, but what it means in practical terms hits almost instantly. Widowhood in the Crusader age is not a pause in your life. It's a complete rearrangement of it. Everything changes: your legal status, your control over property, your safety, even your freedom to choose where you live. If you are in Europe, the sudden absence of your husband's authority can be like a crack in the ice, an opening through which others will test the strength of what you hold. Your in-laws may insist that the lands or business you've been running belong to them now. A local lord might suddenly remember a claim on your fields, and without a husband to speak for you in court, every dispute is harder to win. If you are in Outremer, the stakes are even sharper. Land there is as much a weapon as it is a resource. The minute you are widowed, you are both a target and a prize. Suitors may appear before you've even buried your dead, some making offers you cannot refuse without risking your security. And refusal can be dangerous. Rejecting the wrong man could earn you an enemy who holds real military power. One mainstream historical fact is that widows in the Crusader states often had to remarry quickly, sometimes within weeks, to protect their holdings. The fragile political balance in these territories meant that a widow's lands could be seized for the security of the realm if they were not anchored by a loyal male lord. Chronicles are full of cases where heiresses and widows became the hinge of entire campaigns simply because of whom they married or refused to marry. For those without land or title, widowhood still has its perils. In a small Crusader town, a widow may be left without income, dependent on the charity of the church or the goodwill of relatives. Many take up work they might never have imagined for themselves. Brewing, weaving, laundering for soldiers, even tending the sick in military hospitals. The loss of a husband's wage or trade can mean the difference between staying in a safe quarter of the city and being pushed to the edge of dangerous streets. And then there is the matter of inheritance, which is as tangled here as any battlefield. The law may say one thing, but custom says another. In some places, a widow is entitled to a portion of her husband's property, her dower. But in practice, she may have to fight tooth and nail to see it. A brother-in-law might hold the estate for her protection, and somehow never return it. Even in cases where the widow is legally recognized as heir, the expectation is that she will remarry and pass control to her new husband. There's a quirky, and at times almost absurd detail in the records. Some widows deliberately married men they knew would not survive long, elderly knights, chronically ill merchants, so they could secure their own position and then quickly return to independent status. These second or third marriages could be calculated moves, giving the woman enough legal protection to keep her property while still minimizing the years she'd spend under another man's authority. But widowhood also creates an unusual kind of mobility. If you are fortunate enough to have means, land, money, or valuable skills, you may have more personal freedom as a widow than you ever had as a wife. You can choose where to live, decide how to run your estate, even engage in trade or diplomacy in your own right. Some women took to traveling, making pilgrimages, or even joining expeditions. Not as camp followers this time, but as independent actors. In Europe, a capable widow could become a power in her own sphere, managing lands so well that neighbours sought her alliance. In the Levant, a few became known as skilled negotiators, able to navigate between rival lords, merchant companies, and religious orders. Chroniclers note women who arranged ransoms for captured knights, brokered truces, or managed the provisioning of entire garrisons. Yet the freedom of widowhood is fragile. A change in political leadership, an invasion, or even a bad harvest can force you into choices you do not want to make. And always, there is the constant undercurrent of being watched by the church, by your neighbours, by those who think your position would be better in their hands. The personal side of loss is harder to carry in a world that rarely pauses for grief. Funerals are brief. Mourning customs vary, but in the Crusader states, the luxury of wearing black for a year is often overshadowed by the immediate need to make decisions. Will you stay here or return to Europe? Will you remarry for protection or try to hold on alone? Who can you trust to manage your affairs when you cannot? You find yourself haunted, not only by absence but by logistics, by the relentless march of tasks that grief doesn't erase. You must sell surplus grain, repair a leaking roof, settle a dispute between tenants. You must write to distant relatives or agents, explaining your new status. The loss becomes part of the background hum of survival, woven into the daily grind, until it's hard to remember the last day you felt uncomplicated joy. Some widows, though, lean into their new role with a kind of grim pride. They sign their own letters, seal them with their own crest. They sit in judgment over disputes, order repairs to fortifications, hire guards for their caravans. And the people, peasants, merchants, soldiers, learn to take their orders as seriously as they once took a man's. If you're one of them, you might also learn a quiet truth. Power taken up in necessity can become a habit. You discover that you prefer deciding for yourself how the harvest is stored or where the soldiers are stationed. You find that your voice in council is not just for courtesy, it carries weight. And though you know the next marriage could strip that away, you tuck the knowledge into your bones where no law can touch it. In the end, widowhood here is not a single experience, but a spectrum from crushing vulnerability to unexpected autonomy. It is a role that reshapes itself around the woman who holds it, as much defined by her resources and allies as by the loss itself. And for every widow who fades into obscurity, there is another who steps into the space left empty and finds she can fill it in ways no one expected. History often forgets their names, recording only the men they married and the lands they transferred. But if you listen closely to the chronicles, to the asides in letters, to the grumbling of rivals, you can still hear their footsteps in the halls they ruled, the markets they kept alive, the fortresses they held against all odds. You might think that queens don't march, that their lives, even in the turbulent age of the Crusades, are confined to high-walled palaces with silk hangings and golden chalices, far from the dust of the road. But in truth, some queens walked, rode, sailed, and trudged the same weary miles as soldiers and pilgrims. They endured storms, mud, and blistering sun, not because they were forced to, but because the stakes were too high to leave the task to others. You can almost see them now, high in the saddle, the hems of their gowns weighted with dust, a retinue straggling behind them in the heat. The image is striking, royal authority moving through the world, not as an untouchable figure, but as a living, breathing presence, eyes scanning the road ahead. These are not the storybook queens waiting patiently for news of battle. These are the queens who become part of the story itself. Eleanor of Aquitaine is the name most people recall, a woman whose life reads like an epic. In 1147, she accompanied her husband, King Louis VII of France, on the Second Crusade. Eleanor wasn't merely decorative baggage, she was Duchess of Aquitaine in her own right, a ruler accustomed to exercising power. Chroniclers, never comfortable with women who step beyond prescribed boundaries, accused her of everything from scandalous dress to encouraging disastrous military decisions. Yet her presence alone shifted the politics of the crusading movement. A queen travelling with the army meant the expedition carried not only the weight of chivalric vows, but the prestige of dynastic power. If you are imagining yourself in her place, you can feel the contradictions pressing in. Your presence is a symbol of unity, yet it can also be a lightning rod for criticism. Every choice, whether to press forward to Antioch, whether to hold the army in winter quarters, will be dissected, not just for military sense, but for whether it fits the notion of a proper queen. One unguarded moment of visible fatigue, and a chronicler's pen will turn it into a tale of weakness. A mainstream historical fact worth knowing is that Eleanor's journey to Antioch became one of the most debated episodes of the Second Crusade. Her uncle Raymond of Poitiers ruled there and sought her political support against Louis. Some sources claim she wanted to stay and help defend Antioch, but Louis insisted she leave, sparking a public rift that scandalized the courts of Europe. Whether the quarrel was over strategy, loyalty, or personal feelings, it showed how a queen on the march could alter the entire course of a crusade. Eleanor wasn't alone in stepping into the dust of the road. Other royal and high-born women took to the march with varying degrees of willingness and purpose. Melisende of Jerusalem, though she did not travel to Europe, embodied the other side of the marching queen, the one who stays in the centre of the storm, directing armies and politics from the heart of the Crusader states. Born to Baldwin II and the Armenian princess Morphia, Melisende inherited the throne of Jerusalem in 1131. Her reign saw her in full command, leading political negotiations and at times military defence, all while resisting her husband's attempts to sideline her. Picture Melisende in her citadel, the air heavy with the scent of oil lamps, and the low murmur of advisers. Outside, soldiers drill in the yard. Inside, maps are spread across the table. For her, marching is not only a matter of moving from place to place, it's sending forces to garrison border towns, dispatching envoys, calculating which walls must be reinforced before the next siege season. Her authority is rooted in a city that is itself the prize of the Crusades, and she wears it like a second crown. The road for these women is not all banners and ceremony. When you march, you share the hardships of the army, heat that makes your vision swim, sudden storms that drench every garment, food supplies that run thin and turn meals into a grim accounting of what can last another week. Even for a queen, the luxuries of home shrink to the essentials: a sturdy tent, a bedroll, a few treasured cups or spoons. The finery brought along for formal occasions must be guarded against damp and dust, or it will mildew before the campaign ends. The quirky truth here is that some queens use the journey itself as a way to display power and legitimacy. The long train of pack animals, the gleam of silver-washed armour in her guard, the embroidered standards catching the sun, these were not only comforts but political theatre. To subjects and allies alike, they said, Here is a queen who can command resources, loyalty and respect across leagues of dangerous road. But being visible also means being vulnerable. There's no hiding in the field. Your tent is pitched where everyone can see it. The sick and wounded pass by on stretchers. The dead carried away on carts. Rumours run ahead of you and behind you. Rumours of defeats, betrayals or worse. The queen has to manage morale, not only among her immediate entourage, but sometimes for the whole army. One poorly timed expression of doubt could echo all the way back to Europe as a sign that the cause is failing. Marching queens also had to navigate the tension between the world's two measures of authority, divine approval and military success. A pious queen could shore up her reputation with acts of charity, feeding the poor in a besieged city, ransoming captives, endowing churches along the route. Yet she also had to be seen as capable in matters of defense. If she erred too far on one side, too pious, too charitable, she might be accused of neglecting military needs. Too far on the other, too martial, too decisive, and she risked accusations of stepping beyond her station as a woman. And then there's the matter of diplomacy. A marching queen often became the bridge between factions. In the Crusader states, where alliances could be made or broken by a single insult, a royal woman's ability to soothe tempers, flatter egos, or offer carefully worded promises could be worth more than an extra company of soldiers. Melisende, for example, was known for her ability to keep peace among fractious barons. At least for a time, her marriage to Fulk of Anjou had been intended to unify interests, but her real work was done in the constant negotiation between nobles with clashing ambitions. If you imagine yourself as such a queen, you might find the nights harder than the days. By torchlight, in a tent flapping with the wind, you read dispatches from distant fronts or letters from allies whose loyalty is only as deep as their latest victory. You know that each decision, whether to send troops here or there, whether to grant a charter, whether to trust a particular envoy, will ripple outward into consequences you can't always predict. Yet there are moments of strange beauty in the march. Riding at dawn, the camp still stirring behind you. You watch the light turn the landscape gold. At certain points along the route, pilgrims kneel as you pass, murmuring prayers for your safety. In markets, women bring baskets of figs and almonds as gifts, pressing them into your hands with shy smiles. Children dart out to wave before vanishing into alleyways. In those moments, the weight of the crown feels almost like a shared burden, something you carry for them as much as for yourself. The march for a queen is never just about reaching the destination. It is about being seen in the act of leading, enduring, deciding. It's about showing that a woman can be at the heart of this holy and brutal enterprise, without being reduced to an ornament on the edge of the map. And when the march ends, whether in triumph, defeat, or uneasy stalemate, you return not the same as you left. Your boots are worn, your skin weathered, your voice seasoned by command. Some queens return to their courts with their authority strengthened, their place in history assured. Others find that the same lords who welcomed their presence on the road now wish to push them back into ceremonial roles. But they all carry the knowledge that they have been in the thick of it, that they have seen the Crusades not from a tapestry's distance, but from the ground where the dust sticks to your skin, and the decisions you make echo far beyond the campfires at night. And in time, long after the banners are furled and the armour stored away, people will still remember that certain queens did not merely reign, they rode, they marched, and in marching they left footprints alongside the knights, the squires, and the countless nameless souls who followed the call to the Holy Land. You've seen armies march and queens ride, but there's another kind of power keeping the Crusades alive, one that doesn't carry a sword or wear a crown. It's quieter, but in some ways just as essential. The endless grinding work of feeding, clothing, arming and supplying the thousands of souls who set off to fight, guard or settle in the Holy Land. Behind the banners and the battles, there is a network of hands that never stop moving. Those hands often belong to merchant wives. At first glance, they may not look like warriors or rulers. Their clothes are practical rather than glittering. Their homes often close to the stink of a harbour or the dust of a caravan road. But without them, the Crusader effort, both in Europe and in Outremer, would collapse in weeks. These are the women who keep the supply lines running. If you imagine yourself as one of them, you start in a port city. It might be Venice, Genoa, Marseille, Acre, or Jaffa. You wake to the cries of dock workers and the groan of ropes on pulleys. The smell is a dense mix of salt water, pitch, and fish guts. Your husband is a merchant. Perhaps he's gone east himself. Perhaps he stays in Europe to manage the big deals. But either way, You are the one making sure goods actually move. You know every ship that comes into harbour. You know the quartermaster on each one who can be bribed for better unloading times, who waters the wine before delivery, who's likely to lose half a cargo to mysterious spoilage. You also know the inland routes, how to get a wagon of grain past a bandit-haunted stretch of road, or which river ferry captain won't try to double his fee at the last moment. A mainstream historical fact. Italian maritime republics like Venice and Genoa became crucial suppliers for the Crusader states. Ships carried not just weapons and reinforcements, but everything from grain and wine to textiles, metal tools, and luxury goods. And while men captained the vessels and signed the big contracts, women often ran the day-to-day operations in their absence, keeping warehouses stocked, supervising loading crews, and negotiating with smaller traders. This is not genteel work. You're on the docks shouting orders to men twice your size, your skirt hem permanently crusted with mud. You haggle over barrels of salted herring, bolts of linen, sacks of flour. You keep ledgers by candlelight, scratching numbers with the same precision a scribe uses for scripture. The money you make and the goods you move will feed soldiers, clothe pilgrims, and keep outposts from starving during sieges. A quirky but true detail. Some merchant wives developed reputations that stretched far beyond their home cities. Chroniclers mention women in Acre who were so skilled at securing rare goods, spices, steel, good timber, that commanders made deals with them directly rather than with their husbands. Others gained notoriety for less noble reasons, smuggling contraband past port authorities or overcharging desperate garrisons in times of shortage. In wartime, necessity often blurs the line between shrewd business and outright profiteering. Inland, along caravan routes, merchant wives might manage way stations where goods are stored and redistributed. These stops are lifelines for the Crusader states, places where weary soldiers can rest, where merchants can repair wagons, where travellers can hear the latest news of safe and unsafe roads. If you run one of these stations, you keep extra grain hidden for emergencies, maintain your own armed guards, and know how to treat a camel's sore feet, as well as you know how to tally an account book. If your husband is away, and many are, for months or years at a time, you are more than a placeholder. You make decisions that can alter the fortunes of your family and even of the Crusader cause. Do you sell your last store of grain to a garrison that can't pay now but promises payment after the next campaign? Do you risk sending valuable cargo along a faster but more dangerous route? Do you raise prices during a siege, knowing it might mean fewer people can afford food but that it will keep your household solvent? Some women turn these choices into long-term legacies. A few become so wealthy that they can fund church repairs, commission ships, or even lend money to knights in need of outfitting. And with wealth comes influence. A word from you can make or break a smaller trader. A contract from you can set a family up for generations. The most successful women in this role are also masters of diplomacy. You may need to deal with Muslim traders one day, Latin knights the next, and Greek Orthodox clergy after that, all with their own customs, currencies, and expectations. A misstep in manners could cost you a deal, or even your safety. So you learn the greetings in several languages, memorize which holidays require which gifts, and cultivate a neutral smile that gives nothing away. The supply work also extends into the battlefield itself. Merchant wives sometimes follow the armies, running makeshift stalls outside siege lines. They sell bread, ale, meat, and other goods to soldiers who have grown sick of army rations. They mend clothes, repair boots, and even rent out tents or cooking gear. These camp market women live in a dangerous limbo, close enough to battles to hear the clash of arms, far enough to pack up and move when the tide turns. One of the stranger truths of this world is that armies can't live on glory alone. A well-fed, well-equipped army can hold a position for months. A starving one collapses in days. And behind that difference are countless hours of unseen labour, much of it done by women whose names never make it into the chronicles. If you step back and look at the bigger picture, you realise that merchant wives and other supply line women form the hidden skeleton of the Crusades. The castles in Outremer don't build themselves. The ships don't sail empty. Every bolt of cloth, every barrel of salt pork, every iron nail has passed through someone's hands. Often those hands were calloused, ink-stained, and ringed with the marks of hard work. Hands belonging to women who had to be tough enough to shout down a drunken sailor and polite enough to charm a high-ranking knight in the same afternoon. When you picture women in the Crusades, the mind's eye often divides them into two neat, unrealistic categories: the pious in prayer and the warriors in armour. Reality, as always, refuses to be so tidy. Some women were indeed cloistered in convents, but the walls of those convents were not always barriers to the world outside. Others wore armour over a habit, the clang of mail blending with the rustle of wool. These were the warrior nuns and devout sisters, women who lived at the intersection of faith and fight. If you imagine yourself among them, the first thing you notice is that devotion here is practical, not merely ceremonial. In an age when the Crusader states are under constant threat, the line between spiritual service and military necessity often blurs. The most famous example might be the Order of St. John, later known as the Knights Hospitaller. While its leadership and core knights were men, the order had women, often called Hospitaller sisters, attached to its hospitals and hospices. A mainstream historical fact, these women were trained in the care of the sick and wounded, tending to pilgrims, soldiers and townsfolk alike. In the Crusader states, such care could easily become frontline work, with patients arriving directly from battlefields or sieges. You can picture the scene, the heavy wooden doors of the infirmary slamming open, two men staggering in with a third slumped between them. The smell of blood, sweat and iron fills the air. You move quickly, your hands already calloused from months of changing bandages and mixing herbal poultices. There is no squeamishness here, you can't afford it. You clean wounds, stitch where you must, and pray quietly under your breath. But not every devout sister stayed inside the walls. A few took to the field, not officially sanctioned as soldiers, but armoured and armed all the same. Chroniclers tell of women who donned mail to defend besieged cities, standing alongside male defenders on the ramparts. Sometimes they were noble women who refused to flee, other times they were nuns whose convents lay directly in the path of an invading army. There's a quirky recorded case from the 12th century. During the siege of Tortosa in 1148, part of the Second Crusade, some accounts suggest that women, including religious women, helped in the defence, manning siege engines and hurling stones. Whether every detail is true or embroidered in the telling, the idea of women taking such an active role shocked some chroniclers and quietly impressed others. Life as a devout sister in the Crusader states wasn't only about direct combat or tending the wounded. Religious women often acted as logistical backbones for military and pilgrim operations. Convents could serve as safe houses for messengers, storage depots for supplies, or even informal schools for orphaned children. The sisters who ran them became trusted community figures, mediating disputes and offering counsel. If you're one of them, your daily rhythm is a strange blend of liturgy and survival prep. You rise before dawn for prayer, then spend hours repairing tents for soldiers, baking bread for passing pilgrims, or brewing medicinal syrups. You may recite the Psalms while stirring a pot of barley soup, or hum a hymn while rolling bandages from worn linen. In some orders, women took formal vows not only of chastity and obedience, but of service to the crusading cause itself. That might mean following an army to provide medical aid, or it might mean maintaining a strategically located convent that doubled as a fortress. A fortified convent was no small thing. Its walls could shelter townspeople in an attack, and its stores of food could keep a garrison alive during a siege. And then there are the moments when the war comes right to your doorstep. You might be standing in the cloister garden when the alarm bell rings, the sound urgent and strange against the usual rhythm of the hours. You grab what you can, perhaps a spear left by a passing soldier, perhaps a crossbow you've been quietly taught to use. You move to the wall alongside townsfolk, the folds of your habit tucked out of the way. The enemy is close enough that you can see the dust on their boots. Some devout sisters became skilled negotiators. In a world where male envoys might be suspected of carrying hidden agendas, a nun could sometimes pass more easily between enemy lines. You might be entrusted with carrying terms of surrender or ransom, relying on your religious status for a measure of protection. It wasn't foolproof. Many women were still captured or harmed, but it was a recognized, if risky, role. A little-known fact, in some cases these women were literate in multiple languages, which made them invaluable for diplomacy. A sister who could read Latin, Greek and Arabic could translate letters, copy treaties, or act as an interpreter in delicate talks. This skill set placed her in rooms where decisions about sieges and alliances were being made, even if she never raised a sword. You also learn that religious life in the Crusader era could be deeply entangled with politics. The patronage of a convent by a noble family wasn't just charity, it was a way of securing influence in the region. If you are the prioress, you might be corresponding with barons, arranging the transport of goods, or even deciding which pilgrims receive scarce beds during a famine. Every choice carries weight, and every alliance has consequences. On feast days, the cloister might fill with both the pious and the powerful. Knights arrive to hear mass before riding out. Merchants stop to make donations in hopes of safe travel. You take their coins, their names, and their whispered requests for prayer. You may also quietly note which knight looked ill, which merchant's cargo was delayed, because information in this world can be as valuable as food or medicine. And through it all, there's the personal dimension. Living in religious service during the Crusades means walking a tightrope between vows and reality. You have promised peace, but you live in war. You have pledged humility, but your position may require giving orders to soldiers or speaking firmly to noblemen. You have vowed stability, but you may be called to travel at a moment's notice. By the time years pass, you've likely seen more of the world's raw edges than many who claim to be warriors. You've watched men die under your hands, seen cities change rulers overnight, felt the hot wind of the desert and the damp chill of stone corridors during a siege. You've learnt that in the Crusader states, survival is a form of warfare in itself, and in that fight, a devout sister can be as vital as any knight on horseback. When you lay your head down at night, whether on a straw pallet in a bustling infirmary, or in the narrow cell of a convent, the sounds of the outside world never truly fade. Hoofbeats on the road, the crash of waves against a harbour wall, the faint clang of a blacksmith's hammer, all reminders that tomorrow you will rise again, not for glory, but for duty. And in this place, at this time, that is its own kind of courage. Siege life is nothing like the romanticised visions painted in later centuries. There's no gallant waiting on the battlements, no stirring speeches every morning to keep spirits high. Living in a siege camp, especially as a woman, is an exhausting grind of dirt, hunger, disease, and constant unease, where even moments of stillness are just the lull before another wave of trouble rolls in. If you imagine yourself here, the first thing you notice is the smell. It's a heavy, mixed stench that clings to everything. Smoke from endless cooking fires, the sour tang of sweat on bodies that haven't seen clean water in days, the iron reek of blood from butchered animals, and underneath it all, the festering smell of waste. The camp sprawls across whatever ground is available, fields, ditches, scrubby hillsides, its layout dictated by the position of the enemy walls and the nearest source of water. You might be here because you followed your husband or brother. You might be here because you're part of the supply train. Bakers, brewers, laundresses, sellers of cooked food. Or you might be trapped inside the besieged city itself, where life is just as grim, only under the constant shadow of enemy siege engines. A mainstream historical fact. Medieval sieges could last months, even years, and most casualties came not from fighting, but from starvation and disease. During the Crusades, the siege of Antioch, 1097–1098, famously lasted almost 8 months, and both besiegers and defenders suffered massive losses from hunger, dysentery, and exhaustion. In a Crusader siege camp, food is the first and last concern of every day. Fresh supplies vanish within weeks, and after that the rations shrink. Coarse bread baked from flour filled out with ground peas or acorns, thin pottage that's more water than grain, strips of dried meat so salty they parch your throat. Women are often in charge of stretching these meagre resources, boiling bones until they yield a cloudy broth, trading with locals for onions or garlic, gathering edible greens from the outskirts of camp. Water is just as precious. Streams near the camp quickly turn foul from waste, so women and children walk farther and farther to fetch water, always under threat from enemy raiding parties or opportunistic thieves. Inside a besieged city, the cisterns grow stagnant, and water rationing becomes strict. Women with infants are sometimes allowed a little more, but not always. Then there's the constant menace of disease. The close quarters, unwashed bodies, and contaminated water make the camp a breeding ground for dysentery, typhus, and worse. You see it start small, a few people too weak to work, a child with a fever, and within days whole clusters of tents are silent, but for coughing. Women act as nurses by necessity, tending to the sick with whatever herbs or remedies they can find. A sprig of mint or a handful of sage becomes as precious as gold. A quirky but true detail. During the Siege of Acre, 1189–111, some accounts mention women bringing water and wine to the men fighting at the front lines, even under fire from enemy archers. Chroniclers recorded this partly in admiration, partly in astonishment, women moving between the chaos of the siege lines as naturally as if they were in a marketplace. The danger doesn't just come from disease or enemy weapons. In a crowded, stressed camp, tempers flare easily. Fights break out over food, over accusations of theft, over rumors that someone is hoarding supplies. Women often become mediators, calming disputes, trading between groups, and maintaining fragile alliances among soldiers from different regions. Sometimes, though, disputes spill into violence, and then even mediation becomes dangerous. Inside the besieged city, life is a mirror image, different in details but equal in hardship. Here, every scrap of food is counted, and women become masters of creative cooking. Rats, dogs, and even leather can end up in the pot when starvation closes in. Families sell possessions for a few handfuls of grain. Mothers go without so their children can eat. If you're in the city, you also live with the relentless noise of siege weapons, the thump of stones hurled by trebuchets, the crash of battering rams, the whistle of arrows. Sleep, for both besieger and besieged, is fractured and light. Fires must be kept burning for warmth and cooking. Watches must be maintained against surprise attacks, and the noise never stops for long. You learn to nap whenever and wherever you can, sitting against a tent pole, lying on a cloak in the dust, even curled up beside a cook fire's dying embers. When an assault is planned, everyone in camp feels it. The tension thickens. Extra bread is baked, wounds from the last skirmish are hastily cleaned, and tools are checked. Buckets for water, ladders for scaling walls, knives and spears for defense. Women might be called on to carry stones for siege engines, fetch arrows for the archers, or tend to the wounded just behind the front line. And when an assault fails, the mood is worse than before. Anger at commanders, despair at the thought of more weeks of grinding hunger. You hear mutters of desertion, even mutiny, though most know the punishment for either is swift and brutal. The weather adds its own cruelty. In summer, heat turns tents into ovens, the air hums with flies, and every scrap of food spoils faster. In winter, rain and mud soak everything. Blankets, bread, even the small caches of firewood you've tried to keep dry. Clothes never fully dry, and the damp seeps into your bones. Inside a besieged city, cold can be just as dangerous, especially when fuel runs out and the choice becomes burning furniture or freezing in the night. Yet amid the misery, there are small acts of resilience. A woman might sneak a loaf of bread to a sick neighbour, mend a child's torn tunic, sing a lullaby loud enough to drown the sound of the siege engines for a few moments. On feast days, even under siege, some manage a small celebration, a crust of bread shared, a candle lit, a prayer whispered together. For some women, siege life becomes a strange sort of schooling. You learn the sound of different siege weapons, the signs of when the enemy is preparing a major attack, the quickest route to shelter when arrows start falling. You become adept at foraging, at bartering, at improvising tools and repairs. You learn who can be trusted and who will sell you out for a mouthful of wine. There's a dangerous rhythm to a long siege. After the initial shock and chaos, people settle into routines that feel almost normal until something happens to break it. A sudden breach in the wall, a fire in the camp, a supply convoy intercepted. Then the entire fragile structure of survival trembles again. And when the end comes, whether it's victory, relief, or surrender, it's rarely clean. Victorious armies may plunder, captives may be taken, and disease often spreads faster in the chaos of movement. If you're lucky, you leave with your life, your family intact, and perhaps a few possessions. If not, the siege will take everything, as it has from so many before. The chronicles may remember the siege for its battles, for the heroics of knights or the strategies of commanders, but the daily reality, the hunger, the endless hauling of water, the tending of wounds in smoky tents, is lived by those who never see their names in ink. For the women in siege camps and cities alike, survival is the only measure of victory that matters. And when you finally walk away from the camp, the city, the battlefield, you carry the memory of the sounds, the smells, the faces of those who didn't make it. You carry it into the next place you go, and the next, because in a world built on conflict, siege, life has a way of finding you again. If life in the Crusader states is already a strange mix of cultures, faiths, and shifting loyalties, then love, or what passes for it here, is an even more volatile element. In Outremer, romance is rarely the simple meeting of hearts. It's tangled with politics, with survival, and with the moral watchfulness of churchmen who seem to see sin in every shadow. But that doesn't stop it from flourishing, often in the most inconvenient places. You don't have to look far to hear whispers in the markets, along the wharves, or behind the shuttered windows of noble houses. The Crusader states are filled with people who have left everything familiar behind. They live in garrisons, in bustling port cities, in outposts far from home. Loneliness sets in quickly, and proximity, especially in the cramped conditions of a siege or long caravan, does the rest. One mainstream historical fact. In the Latin kingdoms, the Church tried hard to regulate sexual behaviour, forbidding unions between Christians and Muslims, heavily discouraging relationships between Latins and local Christians of other rites, and condemning adultery outright. Yet the sheer diversity and transience of the population made enforcement difficult. The records are dotted with cases of extramarital affairs, bigamy, and outright scandal, often involving prominent figures. If you imagine yourself here, perhaps you are a merchant's wife, whose husband spends months away on the road to Damascus, or you're a lady of a fortress town, whose lord rides south on campaign, leaving you with too much time and too little companionship. You know the rules, but rules don't stop longing, and longing here can find unexpected outlets. The most notorious example of love turning into political crisis is the story of Queen Isabella I of Jerusalem. Her marital history reads like a chronicle of the kingdom's shifting alliances. Married first as a child for political reasons, later divorced and remarried under pressure, she eventually wed Conrad of Montferrat, one of the most capable leaders in the kingdom. But after Conrad's assassination, her swift marriage to Henry of Champagne raised eyebrows and suspicions in every court from Acre to Rome. In her case, personal relationships were inseparable from the survival of the kingdom, and every marriage carried both romantic rumour and political consequence. For those not on thrones, scandal still has teeth. In the tightly knit noble circles of Outremer, even a hint of impropriety can be used as a weapon. A rival might spread tales of a lady's undue familiarity with a visiting knight, or a jealous husband might accuse his wife of infidelity to discredit her influence. Truth matters less than perception, and perception can shift in a heartbeat. A quirky historical tidbit. Some chroniclers complained that the Crusader states encouraged luxury and licentiousness, blaming the warm climate and abundance of exotic goods for moral decay. They claimed Frankish women dressed more provocatively here, and that both men and women were too free with each other's company compared to Europe. Whether this was moral panic or reality, it shows that Outremer's mingling of cultures created both fascination and suspicion. Relationships across religious lines happened too, despite the risks. A Latin Christian man might be drawn to a local Muslim or Jewish woman, or vice versa. Such unions were often condemned by the Church, and in some cases by Islamic authorities as well. But they did occur, sometimes secretly, sometimes openly enough to cause diplomatic headaches. Children from these relationships often lived in a liminal space, navigating multiple cultural worlds but sometimes accepted fully by neither. For women, love in a Outremer could also mean survival. A widow without strong family backing might choose a husband based on his ability to protect her lands, even if affection played no role. Conversely, a well-placed affair could secure a woman a powerful patron, an escape from an unhappy marriage, or simply a safer position in the volatile social hierarchy. These were dangerous gambles, of course. If discovered, the Church could impose penance, families could disown her, and in the worst cases the penalty could be severe. Life in the garrison towns is especially ripe for rumour and entanglement. A fortress like Kerak or Crac de Chavalet houses soldiers from across Europe, plus servants, merchants, and occasional visiting nobles. Here, women may run small taverns, bake bread for the soldiers, or tend to laundry, and in the close quarters of fortress life, familiarity can turn into intimacy quickly. Nights are long, the walls feel close, and the knowledge that a siege or raid could come at any time makes people seek comfort where they can. And yet, in all the murk of illicit affairs and whispered scandals, there are true love stories, rare but real. A knight might wed a local woman out of genuine affection, defying family expectations. A merchant might risk his fortune to ransom a lover captured in a raid. Even within the rigid structures of arranged marriage, some couples grow to respect and care deeply for one another, their partnership forged in the fires of survival. The Church, ever watchful, tries to steer passion into acceptable channels. Sermons warn against lust and the dangers of heathen temptations. Confessors urge penance for sins of the flesh. But desire is stubborn, and in a land where death is never far, the promise of joy, even fleeting, is hard to resist. If you are a woman in this world, You learn quickly how to navigate its romantic currents. If you're married, you guard your reputation as fiercely as your life, unless you're ready to risk both. If you're unmarried, you weigh each suitor not just for charm, but for what alliance he brings. And if you do take a lover, you learn the art of discretion, meeting at odd hours, trusting only the most loyal friends with your secret, and keeping a public face that betrays nothing. You also learn that love can be weaponized. A jealous rival might hint that you're being courted by an enemy officer, or that your friendship with a certain merchant has crossed the line. Even if untrue, such accusations can travel fast, eroding alliances and altering your place in the careful balance of power. There's a certain irony here. The same land that is supposed to be holy is also a place where passions run hot, where alliances shift with the tide, and where the boundaries between love, lust, and politics blur into something unrecognizable. And perhaps that's why the stories endure, because they show that even in the midst of holy war, the human heart still beats to its own complicated rhythm. When the sun sets over the walls of Acre or Jerusalem, and the streets grow quiet, but for the soft notes of music from a tavern, or the call to prayer from a distant minaret, you can almost forget the wars and the politics. You can almost believe in the simplicity of two people finding each other in a world that's falling apart. And maybe, for a night, that belief is enough. You can feel the tension before you even step into the courtyard. It's there in the way conversations pause when a new face appears, in the sidelong glances between families, in the slight edge to polite greetings. Mixed marriages between European Crusaders and local women of Christian, Muslim, or Jewish heritage are neither unheard of nor entirely accepted in the Crusader states. They are at once bridges and fault lines, connections that can bring stability or ignite disputes depending on who's watching and what's at stake. If you picture yourself in this world, imagine arriving in a port city like Acre or Tyre in the early 12th century. The streets are a tapestry of languages: French, Provençal, Italian, Greek, Armenian, Arabic, and more. Merchants haggle in one tongue, curse in another. Children play in alleyways, switching languages mid-sentence. You might be from Europe, newly arrived and looking for a place in this foreign, sun-soaked land, or you might be from here, born into a family that has called these shores home for generations. Either way, marriage is not just a personal choice, it's a declaration of alliance. A mainstream historical fact. While the Church officially discouraged interfaith marriages, particularly between Latin Christians and Muslims or Jews, the reality on the ground was more complex. Political necessity, personal desire, and the fluid nature of life in the Crusader states meant that such unions did happen. Marriages between Latin men and Eastern Christian women, Greek Orthodox, Armenian Apostolic, Syriac Orthodox, were especially common, as they could cement alliances with local elites without crossing the religious lines that most Latin clergy found unacceptable. If you are a European man marrying a local Christian woman, the match can be mutually beneficial. You gain ties to influential local families who know the terrain, the markets, and the politics far better than you ever could. Your wife's family gains a link to the military power and status of the Latin elite. But the marriage is not without friction. You bring your customs, your food, your language, she brings hers. Household routines become acts of negotiation. Do you observe Latin feast days or Orthodox ones? Whose language will the children learn first? Which priest will baptize them? In households where the match crosses not just church traditions but faith boundaries, say a Latin Christian man marrying a Muslim woman who has converted, things are even more complicated. Conversion might be genuine, or it might be a formality to satisfy the Latin clergy. Neighbours and extended family may view the union with suspicion, sometimes outright hostility. And yet such marriages can also be deeply strategic, opening channels of communication between communities that would otherwise have little contact. For women, marrying across these lines can be an act of agency or of survival. A local Christian woman might choose a Latin husband to gain protection in a city dominated by Crusaders. A Muslim or Jewish woman might see marriage, often after conversion, as a way to secure better economic prospects. Conversely, some European women marry into local families, whether through love, political alliance, or the reality that the European population here is a small fraction of the whole. A quirky but telling detail. Some households in the Crusader states kept multiple sets of tableware and cooking utensils to accommodate different dietary laws. A Latin husband might eat pork, while his Eastern Christian or Jewish wife would not. Kitchens became spaces where not just food, but identity was managed. Language barriers shape daily life in these households. Many couples rely on interpreters at first, relatives, servants, or friends who can bridge the gap. Over time, one or both partners may learn the other's tongue, but misunderstandings can still be common. A mistranslated phrase can lead to laughter or to arguments. Children in these households often grow up bilingual or trilingual, slipping between languages with the ease of play. From the outside, mixed marriages can be political symbols. In times of peace, they are cited as proof that coexistence is possible. In times of tension, they are painted as dangerous compromises or even betrayals. The same marriage celebrated at one feast can be whispered about in disapproval at another. Inside the home, though, the concerns are often far more ordinary. Who will fetch water? How will the garden be planted? Which stories will be told to the children at night? And yet those ordinary decisions are shaped by the extraordinary positions such couples occupy. Every choice is a balancing act between traditions. These marriages can produce unexpected cultural blending. Clothing styles mix European wool tunics paired with locally woven silk sashes, headscarves embroidered in hybrid patterns. Recipes merge, a Frankish stew thickened with chickpeas and flavoured with cinnamon, flatbreads served alongside cheese from goat's milk. Music in the household might alternate between troubadour ballads and Armenian folk songs. Not all mixed marriages are happy unions. Cultural misunderstandings can fester into resentment. A wife used to the privacy of her family's courtyard might chafe at a husband's expectation that she appear frequently in public. A husband accustomed to rigid feudal hierarchies might be unsettled by his wife's family's more informal style of leadership, or their different approach to hospitality. Then there are the pressures from outside. In times of religious tension, such couples can become targets. An edict might suddenly forbid interfaith marriage, casting doubt on the legitimacy of their union. A change in political leadership could shift which alliances are safe and which are suspect. In some cases, couples are forced to relocate, seeking a city or territory where their marriage is accepted. For those who endure, mixed marriages can create strong, adaptable families. Children raised in such households often inherit not only multiple languages, but multiple perspectives. They may be more adept at navigating the complex politics of the Crusader states, able to speak comfortably with both Latin lords and local notables. Some grow into positions of real influence, serving as intermediaries, translators, or diplomats. One little-known fact: certain noble families in Outremer quietly cultivated a tradition of such marriages over generations, believing that kinship ties to multiple communities strengthened their position. These families could call on a wider network of allies and had a deeper understanding of the region's social fabric. Still, the balancing act never ends. You might find yourself defending your spouse's customs to your own relatives, or explaining your relatives' customs to your spouse. In the marketplace, you notice which merchants greet you warmly, and which ones' smiles freeze when they see who you're with. At church or in the street, you learn to read the subtle signals, a nod, a frown, a two-pointed question, that reveal what people think of your match. And yet, for all the challenges, there are moments when the outside world falls away. Sitting together in the evening, sharing a meal that blends both your heritages, watching your children play with neighbours from both sides of the cultural divide, you realise you have built something rare in this fractured land. Whether history will see it as a bridge or a breach is beyond your control. All you can do is live it, day by day, in the hope that love, or at least mutual respect, can hold against the shifting tides. And in the Crusader states, that's as close to certainty as anyone gets. You've heard it before. War is not just fought with swords and siege engines, but with whispers, with scraps of paper, with the sudden and quiet passing of a word in the right ear at the right moment. In the Crusader states, spies and messengers are as important to survival as knights in shining mail, and women, often underestimated, overlooked or dismissed, are some of the most effective of them all. If you imagine yourself here, think of the crowded, noisy market in Acre or Damascus. Your basket is heavy with figs or bolts of cloth, your head covered modestly, your pace unhurried. To anyone watching, you are a merchant's wife or a trader's daughter. In truth, the cloth in your basket hides a folded note sealed with wax, or perhaps a small object whose shape could give away a secret. You're not just buying fruit, you're moving information across a city where every gate is watched. A mainstream historical fact: women were often used as messengers and couriers during the Crusades because they could pass more easily through certain checkpoints or enemy lines. Soldiers, guards, and officials tended to see armed men as the only real threat, which made women, especially those appearing to travel for domestic or religious purposes, less likely to be searched thoroughly. This was a dangerous underestimation. You might be carrying a letter from a garrison commander to a besieged city, listing which supplies are running low. Or perhaps you're smuggling out intelligence about the strength and position of enemy forces. Sometimes you carry no physical object at all, just words, memorized and repeated exactly, because a written message could be intercepted. The tools of the trade are as varied as the women themselves. Some sew messages into the lining of cloaks, others hide them in loaves of bread, jars of oil, or the false bottoms of baskets. A quirky but true detail from later medieval espionage, with roots in earlier practices, is the use of eggs. The shell was emptied, a thin piece of parchment rolled inside, and the egg resealed with wax. To the casual observer, it looked like part of an ordinary market purchase. Messengers are not always working for kings or commanders. Sometimes they serve merchant families protecting their trade routes, passing along warnings of raiders or market shortages. Sometimes they carry private correspondence between separated spouses or lovers, letters that could ruin reputations if intercepted. And sometimes they act for religious orders, ferrying information between monasteries, convents, and outposts. The role of spy is even riskier. Spies must gather information before they can deliver it, and that means moving in places where you are not wanted. A woman might enter a town under the pretext of visiting relatives, but in truth she's noting the number of guards on the walls, the state of the armory, or the condition of the roads. She may linger in taverns where soldiers drink, listening for loose talk. She may befriend a merchant whose goods are inspected by enemy officers, hoping he will pass along what he hears. And there is a unique advantage here. People tend to speak more freely around those they do not see as a threat. A serving woman in a noble house, refilling cups and clearing plates, might overhear far more than the noblemen realize. A washerwoman at a military camp could catch snatches of conversation about troop movements while scrubbing tunics by the river. But there's no romance in the risk. If you are caught with a suspicious message or accused of spying, the consequences can be swift and brutal. Public shaming, imprisonment, or death. Even suspicion can be dangerous. If someone believes you've been passing word to the wrong side, allies may turn cold and doors may shut in your face. To do this work well, you must master the art of invisibility. You learn to speak when spoken to and to fade when the talk turns dangerous. You adopt the mannerisms of someone with no interest in politics, no awareness of war, while inside every nerve is tuned to catch meaning in tone, choice of words, or half-finished sentences. Some of the most skilled women in this role use multiple identities, shifting as needed. You might be a pious pilgrim one week, a fruit seller the next, a midwife called to a noble household after that. Each role opens different doors and earns different kinds of trust. A pilgrim can enter shrines and holy sites where military commanders meet in private prayer. A midwife can pass in and out of women's quarters in noble houses without drawing male suspicion. There are stories, half fact, half legend, of women who became so adept that they could pass intelligence between Christian and Muslim leaders without either side realizing the full extent of their knowledge. One tale tells of a Christian woman in Jerusalem who supplied information to Muslim forces while maintaining her place in the confidence of the Latin court. Another tells of an Armenian merchant's widow who carried coded messages between ports, hidden in the embroidery patterns of the cloth she sold. If you are working as a courier, the journey itself can be the most dangerous part. The roads of the Crusader states are unpredictable. Bandits, shifting patrols, sudden skirmishes. You might be stopped and questioned a dozen times between Tyre and Jerusalem. You must know which guards can be bribed, which will take offence, and which will search you thoroughly no matter how innocent you appear. And then there is the problem of delivery. A message is worthless if it falls into the wrong hands. You might be told to place it under a certain stone in a garden, to hand it to a specific child in a market, or to leave it in a jar at a roadside shrine. You may never meet the person it's meant for, and that's safer for everyone involved. The emotional cost is high. You live with the constant knowledge that a single mistake could doom not just you, but everyone connected to the message you carry. You cannot tell friends what you're doing. You cannot boast of successes. The most you can hope for is a quiet acknowledgement from your contact, a nod, a single word, sometimes just the absence of disaster. But there are moments when you see the results of your work. A city holds out longer because supplies arrive just in time. An ambush fails because the enemy was warned. A prisoner is ransomed because the negotiations were carried by the right person to the right place. You might never be thanked publicly, but you know the part you played. In this world, the line between spy, messenger, and ordinary traveller is thin. Sometimes you are one, sometimes all three, and you learn to live with the ambiguity, because in the Crusader states, information is as valuable and as dangerous as gold. And so you keep walking, basket on your arm, eyes low, ears open. You smile when necessary, nod when required, and pass unnoticed through gates and streets. Behind your calm face, the message you carry, whether written, spoken, or hidden in your mind, moves closer to its destination, and with it, so does the fate of someone's battle, someone's alliance, someone's life. You know the sound before you see the scene. A low, heavy clank of chains, a muffled groan, the shuffle of tired feet. The people coming through the gate are not merchants, not pilgrims, they are captives. In the Crusader world, captivity is a currency. Men and women alike can be taken in war, in raids, or even on the open road. Once caught, you are no longer just a person, you are a bargaining chip, a commodity with a value in gold, goods, or political leverage. If you picture yourself here, perhaps you're watching from the edges of a market square as prisoners are brought in. Muslim villagers taken in a Frankish raid, Christian townsfolk captured during a counterattack, Jewish merchants seized on the road and stripped of their wares. Or perhaps you are among them, wrists bound, the world reduced to the short length of chain between you and the person in front of you. A mainstream historical fact. Ransom was an integral part of warfare in the Crusader period. The capture of high-ranking nobles could mean enormous payments, sometimes so large that entire cities or religious orders would raise funds to free them. Lesser captives might be sold into slavery or exchanged for goods. Women were not exempt from this system. Their value on the ransom market depended on their rank, connections, and sometimes their skills. If you are a noble woman taken prisoner, your captors will likely know exactly who you are and what your family can pay. You may be kept under guard in relative comfort, given decent food and clothing, not from kindness, but because you are worth more alive and well. Your treatment depends on your captor's goals. If they hope for a quick ransom, they may allow you to send letters home to urge your kin to act fast. If they want leverage in a political negotiation, you may become a hostage for months or years. For women of lesser means, captivity can be far harsher. You may be marched for days in the heat with little food, your captors caring only that you survive long enough to be sold or traded. In port cities, slave markets operate openly, with buyers inspecting captives as they would livestock. Some women end up in domestic servitude in foreign households. Others are put to labour in fields or workshops. Conversion to the captor's faith is sometimes encouraged, sometimes forced, sometimes ignored entirely. A quirky but true detail. In some cases, women themselves acted as intermediaries in ransom negotiations. A wife might travel across dangerous territory to plead for her husband's release, carrying letters of safe conduct from both sides. Mothers might oversee the gathering of ransom funds, pawning family heirlooms or selling land to meet the demand. Religious orders like the Trinitarians and Mercedarians, founded later in the medieval period, specialized in ransoming captives, and women sometimes worked alongside them, raising money and delivering it. The bargaining process can be as complex as any siege. The captor sets a price, often inflated, expecting haggling. The captive's family counters, sending gifts to keep the negotiation friendly. In some cases, partial payments are made in stages, with the prisoner allowed certain freedoms in exchange for promises of the balance. Sometimes, a temporary exchange is made, hostages swapped to guarantee that terms will be met. Women caught in this system may find themselves traded more than once before the matter is settled. For those taken by the opposite side in the religious divide, there is an added layer of tension. A Christian woman held in a Muslim city, or a Muslim woman in a Christian stronghold, may face pressure to convert, whether as a genuine act of faith, a bargaining chip, or a condition of better treatment. Some resist and hold to their faith through years of captivity. Others find new lives in their captor's world, whether by choice or necessity. Chroniclers often cast these stories in stark terms of loyalty or betrayal, but reality was more complicated. Inside captivity, you learn quickly to read your situation. Are your guards bored and careless, or watchful and disciplined? Do they treat you as a burden or as an asset? Can you send word to allies, or are you cut off entirely? Every interaction is a negotiation, even if it's just for an extra cup of water or a few minutes in the sun. If you are lucky or connected, your release might come through an arranged payment. The arrival of a ransom is both a relief and a risk. The exchange itself must be handled carefully, often in neutral ground, with both sides wary of treachery. You may be escorted under guard to a designated spot, heart pounding as you see the familiar colours of your people's banners in the distance. Only when the payment is counted and accepted will you be allowed to walk free. For some, release is only the start of another ordeal. Returning home after captivity is complicated. You may be met with relief and joy, but also with suspicion, questions about how you were treated, whether you cooperated with your captors, whether you are the same as before. For noble women, politics may dictate your next steps. A marriage arranged to strengthen alliances, a public display of piety to restore your reputation. For common women, returning to the rhythms of market, field or household can feel surreal after months or years in another life. And there are those who never return. Some die in captivity, their families unable or unwilling to meet the ransom. Others choose not to go back, having found security, marriage or acceptance in their new surroundings. Chroniclers often omit these stories, or frame them as tragedies, but they are part of the fabric of life in this fractured land. Captivity also has a way of crossing the neat lines of enemy and ally. It's not unheard of for captives to form relationships of friendship, of trade, even of romance with individuals on the other side. A woman who tends the household of her captor may gain influence there, just as a woman ransomed by her enemy's ally may find herself in an awkward position when war flares again. The markets, the negotiations, the exchanges, they all underscore one truth. In the Crusader world, human lives are part of the economy of war. Women are not only caught in this system, but also navigate it, sometimes as victims, sometimes as agents, and often as both. If you find yourself in such a role, whether as the one held or the one bargaining for a release, you learn that survival here depends on adaptability, on knowing when to yield and when to stand firm, and on finding moments of dignity in a system designed to strip it away. And when the gate finally closes behind you, whether into freedom or into another's household, you carry the memory of chains with you, not just their weight, but the knowledge of how easily they can be clasped around anyone's wrists in this land, where loyalty, faith, and fortune shift as quickly as the desert wind. Pilgrims come to the Holy Land with all sorts of intentions. Some arrive on ships brimming with zeal and carefully packed relic cases, expecting to kneel at the tomb of Christ and then turn right around for home. Others limp into Jerusalem after months of dusty roads, blistered feet and stolen purses, determined that the sight of the Holy Sepulchre will heal more than their bodies. But a curious few women among them never leave. Whether by choice, circumstance or necessity, they remain in the Crusader states, becoming part of the land they once meant to visit only briefly. If you picture yourself among these women, you might start as a pilgrim from England, France or the Rhineland. Your plan is simple: make the journey, pray at the sacred sites, and return with the glow of someone who has walked in the footsteps of Christ. You might have saved for years, joined a caravan for safety, and endured seasickness on a crowded galley to get here, and then you simply don't go back. A mainstream historical fact, by the 12th and 13th centuries, the Crusader states saw a steady stream of pilgrims who stayed behind, some temporarily, some for the rest of their lives. Records from Jerusalem, Acre, and Bethlehem show European-born residents who began as pilgrims and later appear in property transactions, guild rolls, or marriage records. Many of these settlers were men, but women are present in the records too, owning houses, running hostels, working in markets, or joining religious communities. Your reasons for staying might be practical. The return journey is dangerous and expensive, and perhaps the companions you travelled with have died or moved on. Maybe you fall ill and can't travel for months, and by the time you recover, the thought of starting the trip all over again feels impossible. Or maybe you've made connections here, a friendship with a local family, an offer of work, the spark of a romance that give you a reason to plant roots. Some women choose religious life as their anchor. Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and other holy cities are home to convents and hospices where sisters care for the sick, feed the poor, and offer lodging to new pilgrims. A devout woman might enter such a community, exchanging her pilgrim's cloak for the habit of a nun or lay sister. In some cases, these institutions actively recruited from among pilgrims, seeing in them fresh energy and European connections that could help their work. Others find a livelihood in the bustling economies of port cities like Acre. Pilgrim traffic creates constant demand for lodging, food, and guides, and women step into these roles with skill. You might run a small inn, bake bread for sale to passing caravans, or serve as a translator for visitors who speak your native tongue. The skills you brought from home, whether weaving, brewing, or midwifery, become the foundation for a life here. A quirky but telling detail. Some women acted as professional guides for newly arrived pilgrims, leading them through the holy sites and explaining their significance. These pilgrim guides often blended personal piety with entrepreneurial sense, charging fees for their services and sometimes arranging package tours that included meals and lodging. Not all decisions to stay are voluntary. War, piracy, or loss of resources can strand pilgrims in the Holy Land. A ship meant to carry you back to Europe might be seized or wrecked. The money you set aside for return passage might be stolen. In such cases, women often relied on local religious communities for temporary shelter, sometimes ending up in long-term service there. For those who marry locally, whether to Europeans already settled in Outremer or to members of local Christian communities, marriage becomes the firmest anchor. The wedding may be small or lavish, depending on your circumstances, but either way, it binds you to the place in a way that makes returning to Europe unlikely. In time, your children will grow up speaking the local languages, knowing the rhythms of the markets, and thinking of this land as home. Life as a settler pilgrim is both ordinary and extraordinary. Ordinary because daily life settles into familiar patterns: buying food, tending a household, dealing with neighbours, observing feast days. Extraordinary because the backdrop is the Holy Land itself, a place where pilgrims still stream in, where armies march out, where the sacred and the volatile coexist in every street. You quickly learn that staying means becoming part of the community, and that community is layered. You might live among other Europeans in a quarter where Latin churches dominate, but your neighbours could also include Armenians, Greeks, Syriac Christians, and Muslims. You exchange greetings in more than one language, and your table might feature both the bread you knew from home and dishes you've learned here: rice spiced with cinnamon, lamb stewed with apricots. This mingling can be rewarding, but it also requires navigating the shifting politics of the Crusader states. Your safety may depend on knowing which roads are safe this season, which gates close early, and which local leaders are at odds. Pilgrims who stay quickly lose the luxury of being outsiders. You can no longer claim the innocence of someone just passing through. Some find purpose in charity. You might help care for sick pilgrims at the Hospital of St. John, or teach orphaned children to read the Psalms. Others invest in trade, importing goods from Europe to sell to the growing settler population. A few become minor landowners, especially if they marry into local families or receive gifts of property for service rendered. There's also the possibility of becoming a cultural bridge. As someone who arrived from Europe but has adapted to life here, you can interpret not just languages but customs. You might explain Latin etiquette to an Armenian merchant, or help a newly arrived European understand why the locals observe certain fasts differently. In a land where misunderstanding can spark conflict, this role is valuable, but staying comes with costs. The friends you arrived with are long gone, their letters growing fewer as years pass. News from home is slow, sometimes reaching you months after the events. You miss the familiar seasons, the taste of certain foods, the songs of your homeland, and you know that if you ever did return, you might be seen as changed, too foreign, too marked by the years abroad. Still, for some, the Holy Land becomes not just a destination but a destiny. You see pilgrims come and go, their faces alight with the novelty of the place. You watch them kneel where you once knelt, marvel at the streets that are now your daily walk, and you know that your journey, unlike theirs, has no return leg, not because you can't leave, but because you no longer want to. In time, you stop thinking of yourself as a pilgrim at all. You are simply a resident of this strange, holy, dangerous, beautiful land, a woman who came for one purpose and found another. Your life here is shaped by forces both vast and intimate: the clash of armies, the bustle of the market, the quiet prayers you still murmur at night. And when new pilgrims ask why you stayed, you may give them the simple answer: work, marriage, calling. But the truth is harder to explain. Somewhere along the way, the road you were walking stopped leading back to where you came from, and started leading deeper into this place, until it became the only home you know. The ship that carries you back to Europe feels heavier than the one that brought you east, not because of its cargo, but because of you. You are not the same woman who left months or years ago. Your hands know work they didn't before. Your mind holds images and sounds that will never fade, and your heart, well, your heart has learnt to live under the constant shadow of loss and change. Returning home after years in the Crusader states is not a matter of slipping neatly into the life you once had. It is a collision of past and present, and the pieces don't always fit. When you first step off the gangplank into a familiar port, perhaps Marseille, Venice, or even the grey coasts of England, the air smells different. It's damp with the scent of home, yes, but also strangely small after the heavy spice of the East. The people speak your language in a way that makes you realise how much of it you've forgotten to use. Your accent has shifted. You pause to find words that once came easily. It's enough to make you feel like a foreigner in your own land. A mainstream historical fact: Crusaders and settlers who returned to Europe often faced reintegration challenges. Some brought wealth, new skills, or valuable goods, but many returned with injuries, illnesses, or debts. Women, especially those who had managed estates, businesses, or political roles in their husband's absence, sometimes found themselves expected to step back into subordinate positions, regardless of their proven capability. If you are a noble woman, the homecoming begins with ceremony. You are greeted by family retainers, led into the hall, seated in the place assigned to you. But behind the smiles and courtesies is the question: will you still run things, or will you hand the keys back to the man who left them with you? If your husband has returned with you, he may take up the reins again without asking how you've managed in his absence. If he has not, if you are a widow, your male relatives may assume the right to decide your future. For a merchant's wife, coming home means reopening the counting house, checking the state of the shop, greeting customers who may or may not still be loyal. You have new goods to sell, silks, spices, perhaps sugar, but you also have debts to settle and competition from traders who stayed behind. Your time in the East has given you sharper bargaining skills, but it may also have earned you suspicion. Are you too changed now? Too worldly? Too willing to haggle like a Levantine? If you were a common woman, a camp follower, a laundress, a nurse, the return can be lonelier still. You may come back without the people you left with, perhaps without even the same name or connections. You have no estate to reclaim, no shop to reopen. You find work where you can, perhaps in service, perhaps in a workshop, and keep your stories mostly to yourself, because few want to hear about the things you've seen. One quirky but true detail: returning Crusaders sometimes brought back unfamiliar habits that startled their communities. Chroniclers grumbled about women adopting Eastern dress or jewelry styles, using imported cosmetics, or favouring spiced dishes over traditional fare. For some, these changes were harmless curiosities. For others, they were seen as signs of moral or cultural corruption. You quickly realise that the memories you carry are not easily shared. Tell someone about the heat of the desert wind, and they nod politely without understanding. Describe the clang of a siege engine, or the cries in a market where half a dozen languages mingle, and they think you're exaggerating. The things that feel vivid and essential to you are to them just distant curiosities. And there is another truth: home itself has changed. The children you left may now be grown. The friends you once confided in have moved away or died. The village or city has its own scars from wars, famines, or political shifts that happened while you were gone. You are returning not to the life you left, but to a place that has been living without you. Reintegration can be a negotiation in itself. If you ran an estate successfully during your husband's absence, you may have to fight to keep even a fraction of that authority. Some men are grateful for what their wives accomplished. Others bristle at the thought of women making independent decisions. If you came back alone without a husband to vouch for you, your independence might be seen as a threat or as an opportunity for others to press you into a new marriage. The church too takes an interest. Priests may question how you kept your virtue in such a foreign and tempting land. Pilgrimage and service to the Crusades are supposed to be holy endeavours, but gossip can twist anything. If you show signs of wealth beyond what you left with, people will wonder how you got it. If you return with less than you had, they will ask what you wasted it on. Yet there are moments of quiet satisfaction. You know how to manage in a crisis. You can bargain with any merchant, stand your ground against a pushy official, and organise supplies for a household or a small army. You may even have brought back books, relics, or skills that set you apart. And for all that others might misunderstand your time in the East, you know its value. Some women use their return to reshape their place in the community. A noble woman might establish a charitable foundation, using her experience to run it effectively. A merchant's wife might expand her family's trade network to include contacts she met abroad. A former camp follower might become a midwife or healer, applying knowledge gained in the rough conditions of war. Still, reintegration is a process, not a moment. There will be dinners where you bite your tongue at someone's naive remark about the heathens. There will be days when you long for the smell of spice markets or the open decks of a ship bound for Acre. You may find yourself restless, looking at the horizon as if it might pull you away again. And sometimes it does. There are records of women who return to Europe only to head east again, unable to settle back into their old lives. They joined new expeditions, took work on trading ships, or travelled as part of pilgrim groups. For them, the Crusader states were not just a chapter, they were the place where they had learned who they were, and the rest of the world felt smaller by comparison. If you do stay, you learn to weave your past into the fabric of your present. You plant herbs in your garden that you first saw in Syrian soil. You keep your best spices locked in a chest, bringing them out for special feasts. You teach your children a few words of Arabic or Greek, even if no one else sees the point. And when the years pass, and younger women ask you what it was like over there, you can decide how much to tell. Maybe you'll speak of the grandeur of Jerusalem, the courage of women in siege camps, the friendships that crossed languages and faiths. Or maybe you'll just smile and say, it was another life, because in many ways it was, and yet it's still part of you, as much as the stones of your own hearth. The road back is never as simple as the road out, but for those who return, carrying the weight of both lives, the true challenge is not just in coming home, it's in making home fit around the person you've become. The years roll on, and the people you knew in the Crusader states, whether they were queens on the march, widows guarding their lands, or camp market traders counting every copper coin, begin to vanish into time. Armies disband, borders shift, alliances crumble. Yet their stories don't simply disappear. They are sifted and reshaped into the songs of minstrels, the painted margins of manuscripts, the gossip of merchants, and the official chronicles of kings. The women of the Crusades, wives, widows, warriors, and wanderers, enter the long afterlife of memory. Some are remembered by name, most are not, and the way they are remembered depends on who is doing the telling. If you imagine yourself here, it is years, perhaps decades after you lived through your part of that history. You're sitting in a warm hall in France or England, or perhaps in a shaded courtyard in Acre, listening as a travelling jongleur plucks at his lute. His voice carries the story of a lady fair and bold, who rode beside her lord to Jerusalem. You recognize pieces of the tale, details of armour, of the dusty road, of a siege that you lived through yourself. But the woman in his song is less a person than an ideal, beautiful, faithful, unafraid. He does not sing of her cracked heels, her sleepless nights, her quiet terror when food ran out. A mainstream historical fact. Many of the stories about women in the Crusades come to us through chronicles written by male clerics or nobles, and through troubadour poetry. These sources often portray women in symbolic roles, as pious pilgrims, as temptresses, or as political pawns, rather than as the complex, pragmatic, and resilient people they were. The songs tend to simplify. A noblewoman who acted as a diplomat during a siege becomes the lady who kept faith until her lord's return. A camp follower who ran a supply stall under fire is erased entirely, her place taken by a nameless crowd of women. The reality, the messy, necessary work done by women of every class, is smoothed away into something more palatable for an audience that wants heroes and morals. And yet, sometimes, truth slips through. In the Histoire de Héraclius, a continuation of William of Tyre's chronicle, we find glimpses of women acting decisively in politics and war. In certain merchant records, the names of women appear as property owners or creditors in Outremer. Even in letters between church leaders, there are mentions, often disapproving of women influencing negotiations or hosting councils. These fragments are gold for the rare scribe or bard who wants to tell a more nuanced story. You hear of Eleanor of Aquitaine, not only as the queen who scandalized the court in Antioch, but as a patron of poets and a ruler in her own right. You hear of Melisende of Jerusalem, whose coins bore her image alongside her husband's, a quiet but powerful statement in an age when female sovereignty was contested. You even hear in whispers about women who fought on the walls of besieged cities, their identities unrecorded but their deeds too striking to ignore. There's a quirky example from later retellings of the Siege of Acre. A legend grows of a woman archer who picked off enemy engineers from the city walls, her skill so precise that the attackers offered a truce just to get her to stop. Whether she existed or not, the fact that the story survived says something about the space women occupied in the medieval imagination. They could be remarkable, even dangerous, but always a little apart from the main current of history. You start to notice patterns in how these stories evolve. If a woman's actions supported the church's goals or upheld a noble family's honor, she is praised as virtuous, courageous, like a man in wisdom. If her actions defied authority or blurred gender expectations too much, she is painted as reckless, wanton, or even cursed. The same siege, the same deeds, could yield two entirely different reputations depending on the teller's loyalties. This shaping of memory is not accidental. It serves purposes: political, moral, cultural. A noble family might exaggerate an ancestor's piety to bolster their claims to land or privilege. A chronicler might insert a cautionary tale about a proud lady whose ambition led to disaster, as a warning to other women not to step beyond their proper roles. Troubadours might embellish romances between knights and noble ladies, turning them into moralized love stories that never happened. And yet, the oral tradition, the gossip in markets, the campfire tales told by soldiers, sometimes keeps a truer record. You might hear an old merchant in Marseille talk about the Lady of Tyre, who out-bargained 3 Genoese captains for grain during a famine. Or a sailor might tell of the nun with the crossbow at Ascalon, laughing as he swears she shot straighter than any man. These are the stories that don't get written down in fine Latin, but they persist, carried by the voices of people who saw or heard them firsthand. In the margins of illuminated manuscripts, artists sometimes tucked in images that hint at these less official tales: a woman holding a sword, a queen seated in council with her hand raised in command, even a group of women hauling stones for a siege engine. These little pictures, half decoration, half commentary, are a visual footnote to the more formal text, reminding us that women were present in moments the main narrative ignored. Over time, these memories cross into legend. A single real woman might inspire multiple characters in different stories. A composite figure emerges, the Crusader lady who can pray like a saint, fight like a knight, and charm like a courtier. She is not one person's truth, but she carries fragments of many lives. If you are one of the women who lived it, watching your story take on a life of its own can be strange. You hear yourself praised for virtues you never claimed, blamed for motives you never had. You watch as your real decisions, messy, urgent, often made under duress, are rewritten as clear moral choices, either shining or damning. And sometimes, the erasures are more complete. Entire categories of women vanish from the record. The washerwomen who followed armies are remembered only when chroniclers use them as symbols of disorder or moral decay. The merchant wives who kept the supply lines open are reduced to anonymous wives and daughters. The widows who held castles are absorbed into the deeds of their male relatives. A quirky truth is that some women tried to control their own legacy. Wealthy or noble women might commission their own tomb inscriptions, paying to have their deeds recorded in stone. Others endowed chapels or left gifts to monasteries with specific instructions for prayers to be said in their memory, an act as much about shaping how they would be remembered as about saving their souls. The songs and stories spread far beyond the Holy Land. In Europe, ballads about ladies of the East become popular in courtly circles. They are sung in great halls where the Crusades are remembered more as a backdrop for chivalric adventure than as the grinding, bloody, and often chaotic reality they were. In these retellings, women's roles are softened, romanticized, or made allegorical, symbols of the Holy Land's beauty or its need for rescue. But in the ports, in the markets, and among the families who actually lived there, the memories are sharper. They remember which women kept a city from starving, which negotiated a surrender that saved lives, which smuggled messages under their skirts. These accounts don't always survive in writing, but they leave traces in family lore, in the placement of a carved symbol on a gravestone, in the way a street is named. You begin to understand that there is no single memory of the women of the Crusades. There are many, layered on top of each other like palimpsests. The official histories may give you a few names and dates. The romances may give you poetry. But the truest record is scattered, in a merchant's ledger, in the margin of a psalter, in the whispered boasting of a granddaughter about what her grandmother once did. And perhaps that's fitting. The Crusades themselves were a tangle of ideals and pragmatism, of high causes and grubby realities. The women who lived through them were no different, neither purely saintly nor purely scandalous, but human beings making choices in impossible circumstances. To remember them honestly You have to accept the contradictions, the blurred lines, the parts that don't resolve neatly into a moral. The legends will keep growing, and the songs will keep being sung. Some will flatter, some will warn, some will simply entertain. And in between the verses, if you listen carefully, you might still catch the echo of real voices, of women who once stood in the heat and dust of the Holy Land, doing what needed to be done. History moves on. The last Crusader strongholds in the Holy Land fall. Acre in 1291, the final great symbol of the Latin kingdoms, torn away by the Mamluk advance. The ports that once rang with the noise of ships arriving from Marseille, Pisa and Venice, grow quiet, their quays abandoned or repurposed for new rulers. The women who lived and worked in these lands, wives, widows, warriors, traders, healers, scatter like seeds in the wind. Some return to Europe, some are absorbed into local communities, some vanish entirely from the written record. And yet their presence lingers. You can still trace it, if you know where to look. In the fortified convents that stand on old frontiers, in the ruins of hostels once run by merchant families whose wives kept the ledgers, in the faint names carved into chapel stones, half erased, but still there, the only surviving mark of a life once lived under the burning Levantine sun. The long shadow of the crusading women is not cast in a single direction. It falls across lore, across legend, across the roles women were allowed or forced to play in centuries to come. A mainstream historical fact. The experiences of women in the Crusader period influenced the way women's legal rights and responsibilities were discussed in Europe. In England, France, and parts of Italy, there are recorded cases from the 13th and 14th centuries of women successfully petitioning to act as regents, citing the precedent of noble ladies who had governed lands while their husbands were away on crusade. Chronicles of Melisende of Jerusalem and similar figures were known to educated elites, and sometimes invoked in these debates, not always to support equality, but as proof that in times of necessity, women could hold authority. For merchant and craftswomen, the Crusades left a quieter but still lasting legacy. The networks forged in ports like Acre and Tyre didn't disappear entirely when the Latin states collapsed. Families who had traded in the East brought home stories, recipes and goods that shaped local economies. Some women returned with knowledge of new dyes, weaving techniques, or cooking methods that became part of European craft traditions. The silk girdle tied around a bride's waist in Florence, the spiced wine served in a Paris tavern, the embroidered altar cloth in a church in Bruges, these could all trace their lineage in part to the movement of people and skills during the crusading era. The legends endure even more strongly than the facts. Troubadour songs of crusading ladies continued to circulate long after the fall of Acre, reshaped to fit the tastes of later courts. By the late Middle Ages, many of these tales had drifted so far from their origins that they were more fantasy than memory. A single real woman might inspire half a dozen fictional heroines, each one more virtuous or more tragic or more daring than the last. A quirky but revealing detail. In some 14th century romances, crusading women are imagined as disguising themselves as men to fight in battle, or slipping into enemy camps to gather intelligence. These plots probably say more about the fantasies of their audiences than about reality, but they show that the idea of women acting boldly in the Crusades had lodged itself in the European imagination. It was an idea both thrilling and unsettling to medieval minds, a reminder that women could step outside the roles prescribed to them, given the right circumstances. In some places, this shadow takes on the shape of myth. Local traditions in the Levant remember unnamed ladies of the Franks, who founded churches or brought water to towns. A ruined tower might be called after a foreign noblewoman, its name passed down through generations without any surviving record of her life. In a village on the coast, an old well might still be pointed out as the Ladies' Well, where a Christian woman once gave water freely to Muslims, Christians and Jews alike during a siege. For the women who returned to Europe, the shadow they carried was personal. Their children and grandchildren grew up hearing stories of the Holy Land, not just of its relics and saints, but of its markets, its dangers, its strange mix of peoples. In some families, the experience became part of their identity, a point of pride. In others, it became a quiet cautionary tale about the costs of distant wars. Over time, the crusading experience became a kind of shorthand in European culture. A woman who showed skill in managing lands might be compared to a lady of Outremer. A tale of romantic steadfastness might be set against the backdrop of a crusading voyage. Even criticism took this form. A woman accused of extravagance might be said to dress like the wives of Acre, a backhanded reference to the supposed luxury of Latin women in the East. But not all shadows are flattering. The Crusades also hardened certain ideas about cultural boundaries, and women often became symbols in those arguments. Marriages across religious lines, which had happened in the Crusader states despite official disapproval, were increasingly condemned in later centuries. In sermons and moral literature, the woman who weds the infidel became a stock example of folly or sin, erasing the more complex realities that had existed on the ground. And yet, despite this narrowing of official narratives, the lived memory, messier, richer, kept finding ways to surface. It appeared in family genealogies that quietly included Eastern Christian or Muslim ancestors. It appeared in cookbooks that blended spices from Syria with French stewing methods. It appeared in church donations given by women whose wealth had been earned, in part from trade routes once tied to Crusader ports. If you stand far enough back, the shadow becomes almost a landscape of its own. In that landscape you see the outlines of the roles women carved for themselves. Sometimes by choice, often by necessity. In a world where faith and war were woven together, you see that they were not merely following in the wake of men, but moving alongside them, sometimes ahead, sometimes in entirely different directions. And in the end, that may be the most enduring part of their legacy, the proof that, in even the most rigid and dangerous circumstances, women adapted, acted, and left their mark. For you, if you have walked through this whole long journey from the boarding of ships in cold European ports, to the dust of the siege camps, to the quiet decisions in market stalls or council chambers, the shadow feels less like something cast by the past, and more like a presence still walking beside you. It is in the way people remember the women of the Crusades, but it is also in the way those women lived, in choices they made that ripple outward through time. The last pages of this story are not written in the fortified cities or on the battlefield, but in the lives built afterward, whether in the green valleys of France, in the narrow lanes of Genoa, in the stone houses of Cyprus, or in villages along the Levantine coast. Some of those lives ended quietly, others left their mark in ways they never could have imagined. History might try to tidy it up, reduce it to a handful of famous names, a few tales repeated until they harden into clichés. But you've seen the longer version. You've walked through the markets, into the halls, over the siege ladders. You've heard the gossip and the hymns, the bargaining and the weeping. You know that the shadow of the crusading women is not one story. It's hundreds, thousands, all braided together into something too wide to fit on a single page. And so the shadow stretches on, as long and as far as memory itself. And now, the journey quiets. The dust of the sieges settles. The sails are furled in harbour. The footsteps fade from the market stones. You can still hear the sea if you listen closely, that slow breathing of the tide, but it's far away now. Breathe in, slowly. Feel your shoulders loosen as you let the air slip out again. The women we've walked beside are at rest now, in their own lands, or in the lands they made their own. Their work is done, the battles are over. The images grow softer, a woman at a table, her hands still over an account book, another standing in a convent garden, the wind catching her veil, another walking home through a port city at dusk, her basket half empty, after a day's trade. None of them knows that their lives will echo so far into the future. The roads they took are empty tonight, the campfires cold. In their place is only the stillness that comes when stories have been told, when the names famous or forgotten have been spoken into the air once more. You can rest here with them, in this quiet space where the centuries dissolve and the world feels smaller. Let the noise of our age drift away. The flicker of the torch in a great hall, the whisper of sand against a stone wall, the distant murmur of the sea, they're just sounds now, not alarms. And as you close your eyes, you might carry with you the sense that their long shadow is not just history. It's a reminder that even in hard places, under hard rules, lives can be shaped with courage, wit, and persistence. The story is done, the light is low, sleep well.